What is an offshore company?
In the past decades, the concepts of offshore and offshore company have become deeply entrenched in the vocabulary of businessmen, politicians, journalists, and ordinary people. However, these terms are still not formalized legislatively, which leads to various interpretations that differ both semantically and emotionally. In the international business practice, offshore companies are companies registered in countries that offer preferential tax regimes, up to full exemption from taxes, for all or just some categories of legal entities. As a rule, a prerequisite for a company's offshore status is a ban on doing any business in the country of incorporation. There are more ways in which offshore companies differ from ordinary ones. In particular, the overwhelming majority of offshore jurisdictions exempt such companies from an obligation to file annual returns or financial statements with any authorities. The accuracy and thoroughness of the company's bookkeeping, therefore, is on the conscience of its owner, and is only governed by a reasonable business need to have proper accounting in place. Another distinctive feature of offshore companies is a higher level of confidentiality of their director and shareholder information. Offshore jurisdictions do not maintain public registers where anyone can find data about the structure of a company. However, there is an apparent trend of moving towards greater transparency.
From the history of the creation of offshore zones.
From the very beginning, the combination of taxpayers being unwilling to pay tax to the Treasury and governments striving to encourage business and trade was the driving force behind the creation of the unique economic institution of the offshore zone. Ancient Phoenician and Greek cities, medieval northern Italian trading republics, pirate outlaws in the Caribbean at the Age of Discovery, all have features typical of classic offshore zones of modern times. It is interesting that the offshore status of many of them survived literally through the centuries. The record in this imaginary competition belongs to the Isle of Man halfway between Great Britain and Ireland. This tiny rocky piece of dry land used to be one of the centers of the empire of the Vikings, the early medieval pirates. The Isle of Man, being a British Crown dependency, retains its offshore status to the present day, and is the accepted face of offshore. Needless to mention the Caribbean, which is home to 70% of the world's offshore zones, where every third island nation has a very liberal tax law, and in the 16th to 18th centuries every single island was in one way or another connected with pirates or privateers of various nationalities. Even Norman Island, which is believed to have inspired the Stevenson's Treasure Island, now forms part of the British Virgin Islands, the world's most popular offshore zone. Modern offshore zones owe their rebirth to the disintegration of colonial empires in the 1960s, 1980s when the economically developed European and American countries were forced to free-float a number of their former dominions which they subsidized. The colonies were advised to stimulate the economy with an inflow of foreign investment by introducing offshore legislation. Are these modern offshore zones going to last? We'll ask a reader concerned by the attacks that economically developed countries have been making in recent years. A decade ago, we were more optimistic about the prospects of the continued existence of offshore zones. Yes, the battle is fought against the drawbacks of offshore territories that do not prevent illegal operations of national and international organized crime, and not against the advantages of free economic zones that encourage business and economic growth. However, the changes in the near-offshore spheres are so significant that the offshore industry is in for a big shake. In fact, it has already begun. Read the chapters towards the end of this book.